The laundromat closed at 9, but the sign on the door said 10, and that was the kind of thing that broke you on a Tuesday. Marlene Cobbs stood on the sidewalk with a garbage bag of wet clothes and nowhere to go. The sky above the strip mall was the color of old dishwater, and the wind had a mean edge to it, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck no matter how high you pull it. She didn't cry. She'd gotten past crying about small things. Wet laundry was a small thing. She told herself that. She kept telling herself that as she walked back to her car, tied the bag to the door handle so the trunk wouldn't smell, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, without starting the engine. On the passenger seat, her 6-year-old son Emmett was asleep against the window, cheek pressed flat, mouth slightly open. His sneakers were on the wrong feet. She'd noticed that morning and hadn't said anything, because he'd put them on himself and seemed proud of it. And some days that was enough. Some days that was everything. Marlene was 38 years old, and she worked the breakfast and lunch shift at a chain diner 2 towns over. She made decent tips on weekends, less on weekdays, and every Monday she did the math in her head on the drive home, dividing what she had against what she owed, and the answer was always the same. Not enough, but close enough to keep going. She had been doing this alone for 2 years. Since Emmett's father left. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a scene, but quietly, the way some men leave, as though they were never fully there to begin with. He just stopped coming home. And then he stopped answering. And then she stopped expecting him to. What she hadn't expected was how permanent that particular silence would become. Not the silence of him being gone. The silence of realizing she had been carrying more than she knew for longer than she thought. She started the car. The heater took a few minutes to kick in. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove. Without any particular destination. Because Emmett's bedtime wasn't for another hour and their apartment was cold. The radiator had been making. Sounds like something was trapped inside it for 3 weeks now. And the landlord had not called back. She drove past a diner she'd never been to. Not the one she worked at, a different one. Local, the kind that had been there since the 70s and still had hand-lettered specials on a chalkboard in the window. Warm yellow light inside. A few cars in the lot. And because she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And because she had $11 in her pocket. And the bag of wet laundry outside was making her feel like the world was mocking her. She turned in. She would get Emmett a hot chocolate. Maybe a piece of pie. She could afford that much. She could afford that much. Today. She carried him in from the car because he was half asleep and slow. His head heavy against her shoulder. He smelled like the outside and whatever shampoo was cheap enough that month. She found a booth near the back, close to the vent, and settled him into the seat. He woke up just enough to look around. "Are we eating?" he asked. "We're getting a little something," she said. "You want hot chocolate?" He nodded, already looking at the laminated menu with the seriousness of a small person who understood that some choices mattered. The diner wasn't busy. A few older men at the counter, a young couple near the door, a woman eating soup alone and reading a paperback. The waitress, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, came over and smiled at Emmett the way people smile at children, when the children are being quiet and still, which was a rarer thing than most people remembered. Marlene ordered the hot chocolate and a slice of apple pie for Emmett. She ordered coffee for herself because coffee was 90 cents, and she needed to hold something warm. She sat back and watched her son study the pie when it came, turning his fork over in his hand before deciding how to approach it. He had a way of being deliberate about things, this boy. He didn't rush. She didn't know where he got that from. Not from her. Not from his father. It seemed like something he'd arrived with, a factory setting, some particular gentleness that was just his. While Emmett ate, Marlene looked at her phone. There were 2 texts from her mother, one from the landlord's property management company. Not the landlord himself, the company. And nothing from anyone who might have called her just to see how she was doing. She put the phone face down on the table. A man came in alone and took the booth diagonal from theirs. She noticed him the way you notice someone when a room isn't crowded, and your eyes have nowhere else to settle. He was somewhere in his early maze. With the kind of face that had probably been easier to read when he was younger. Dark jacket, work boots that had seen actual work. He sat down and ordered without looking at the menu. The way people do when they've been somewhere enough times to know what they want. Or when they don't particularly care what they get. He didn't have his phone out. He didn't read anything. He just sat and looked at the table and then at the window, where the parking lot lights made orange smears in the dark. Marlene looked away. She wasn't watching him. She was just running out of other things to look at. Emmett finished most of his pie and drank his hot chocolate down to the last half inch. which he swirled without drinking, because he always did that. Kept a little of something good at the bottom. She'd asked him once why, and he'd said he didn't know. She thought maybe he was hedging against the end of it, keeping the option open a little longer. She asked for the check. The waitress came back looking uncertain in a way that waitresses don't usually look uncertain. She set the check down but kept her hand near it for a moment. "This is going to sound a little funny," she said, and then lowered her voice slightly. "But the gentleman in the booth over there, he asked if he could take care of this, your check." Marlene looked up. "He said it like a question," the waitress continued. "So I'm asking. I told him I'd check." Marlene looked over at the man in the dark jacket. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at his coffee, and there was something careful about the way he was not looking at them that told her he was aware he was being talked about and was trying to make it easier for her to say no. She didn't know what to do with that. "I don't know him," she said. "I know," said the waitress. "He said that too. He said you don't know him and you don't have to say yes, and if you say no he completely understands." Emmett was watching her now. He'd picked up on the tone shift, the way children do, their antennae for adult uncertainty being much more finely tuned than anyone gives them credit for. Marlene's first instinct was to say no. It was a strong instinct. The kind she'd had since she was a girl, this particular allergy to being a person who needed things. She'd watched her own mother accept help with a kind of grimace that made the help feel like a small humiliation. And she'd absorbed that, internalized it, carried it into adulthood the way you carry the things your mother teaches you without either of you meaning to. She looked at Emmett. He had a faint hot chocolate mustache. He was looking at her, with an expression that was simply curious, no agenda in it, just waiting to see what came next. She thought about the wet laundry in the bag tied to her car door. She thought about the $11. She thought about the radiator, and the property management company, and the particular math of Monday mornings. She looked back at the man in the dark jacket, who was still not looking at them. "Okay," she said. "Tell him okay, and thank you." The waitress nodded and went over to him. Marlene saw her say something. The man nodded once without looking up. That was all. Emmett tugged her sleeve. "What happened?" "That man over there is paying for our pie." Emmett processed this. "Why?" "Because he wanted to." Emmett looked at the man with open evaluation, the way kids look at people when they're actually thinking. Then he looked back at his mother. "Is that allowed?" "Yeah," she said. "It's allowed." A few minutes passed. Emmett had finished the last half-inch of his hot chocolate. The diner was quieter now. The couple near the door had gone, and one of the men at the counter had left. And the woman with the paperback had moved on to the last few pages. Was doing the thing she did sometimes where she looked like she was just sitting, but was actually holding very still. So she didn't have to feel how tired she was. She didn't know what made her do what she did next. Some combination of the pie and the wet laundry and the way the man had told the waitress that she could say no and he would understand. She got up from the booth and walked over to his. He looked up when she stopped at the edge of his table. Up close, she could see that he had the particular kind of tired that isn't the kind a good night's sleep fixes. The kind that settled in over a long time. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "In person. I don't usually. I wanted to say it myself." He nodded. "You don't have to, I know." She paused. "Why did you do that?" He was quiet for a moment. Not like he was deciding whether to answer, but like he was deciding how. "I've been in situations where someone doing a small thing made a difference," he said. "That's all it is." She nodded. She didn't push it. "Some answers are complete as they are." "I'm Marlene," she said. "Ray," he said. He didn't offer a last name and she didn't ask. "You got kids?" she asked, and she wasn't sure why she asked that, except that there was something in his expression she recognized. He was quiet again for a beat. "A daughter. She's 7. I have her on weekends." Marlene heard what was underneath that. "Weekends only" is its own particular kind of sentence. "It's hard," she said. It wasn't a question or a consolation. It was just an acknowledgement. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She stood there another moment and then she said, "Well, thank you, Ray, really." She went back to her booth. Emmett had put on his jacket by himself, both arms through correctly, which she made a point of noticing out loud because it mattered to him when she noticed things. She helped him with the zipper. She put on her own coat. As she was standing to go, the waitress appeared again, this time with something in her hand. A to-go cup of coffee, lid on, and a small paper bag. "From him," she said simply. Marlene looked inside the bag. A second piece of apple pie wrapped in wax paper, and underneath it, a folded napkin. She waited until she was outside, standing under the overhang with Emmett while she found her keys, to open the napkin. The parking lot was quiet. The wet laundry bag rustled slightly in the wind against the car door. The handwriting was careful, like someone who didn't write by hand often but was trying to be legible. For the road. Some nights are longer than others. You're doing better than you think. That was all. She stood there reading it twice. Not because the words were complicated, but because they weren't, and that made them land harder. She had been holding herself together with the particular kind of tension that lives in the jaw and the shoulders. And those 11 words reached right through it. Emmett was leaning against her leg, looking at a moth that was circling the parking lot light. She folded the napkin and put it in her jacket pocket. She didn't cry in the parking lot. She waited until she was in the car with the doors closed and Emmett was buckled in the back asking about the moth. Where did it go? Do moths sleep? Are they nocturnal like owls? She answered him in a voice she kept steady, and she started the car, and she let 2 tears fall while she was looking at the rearview mirror checking the lot behind her, and that was it. That was enough. They drove home. The heat worked tonight. The radiator knocked once and then settled, as if it had made a decision. She got Emmett into bed, wrong-footed sneakers finally off, and sat on the edge of the mattress, while he talked himself down from wakefulness the way he always did, trailing off mid-sentence about something he'd seen a cartoon character do, eyes closing before he finished the thought. She washed the dishes. She found a plastic bag under the sink, and moved the wet clothes from the garbage bag into it so they'd air out a little. And she could try the laundromat tomorrow. She made herself tea and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street. In her pocket, her hand found the napkin. She didn't know anything about Ray, didn't know what he did or where he lived, or what the specific shape of his own difficulty looked like. She knew he had a daughter he saw on weekends, and she knew he was the kind of tired she recognized, and she knew he had looked at her coffee check and a piece of pie, and seen something in it that moved him to act. That was enough to know. Maybe that was all that needed to be known. She thought about what she would tell Emmett if he asked about it tomorrow, which he probably would, because he was a child who followed things to their conclusions. She thought she would say, sometimes a stranger sees you carrying something heavy, and they help you set it down for a second. Not because they want anything. Not because they know you. Just because they've carried heavy things too, and they remember what it feels like, and that memory makes them kind. She thought that was true. She thought that was as good an explanation as any for why people do the small things they do. The things that don't make the news and don't get photographed. And don't earn anyone anything, except that quiet feeling of having acted like the person you hoped you were. Outside, the street was empty. A dog barked somewhere a few blocks over and then stopped. A car passed without slowing. Marlene finished her tea. She took the napkin out of her pocket one more time and read it again in the kitchen light, and this time she didn't put it back in her pocket. She went to the refrigerator and found a magnet. A lobster, from a trip to Maine, she'd taken years ago, before everything, with people she didn't see much anymore. And she pressed the napkin flat against the refrigerator door. You're doing better than you think. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She slept better than she had in weeks. Not because anything had been solved. Not because the radiator was fixed, or the laundry was done, or the Monday math had changed, but because someone she didn't know had looked in her direction and decided to say so. And sometimes, in the long and ordinary life of a person who is doing their best, that is the thing that carries you forward.